Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about what I'm going to be writing for my dissertation in my final year of university. I'm going back to Durham at the beginning of October to finish my degree, so that means I have to do a dissertation because it's my final year. And I am a bit scared about the dissertation because it's 12,000 words, which is an awful lot of writing. Academically, that is very challenging because the amount of things you have to research for 12,000 words is ridiculous. Even though I'm generally quite good at organisation, I'm still terrified about the prospect of writing 12,000 words. So if you have written a dissertation before, please give me some advice in the comments below about how to succeed. To give a bit more context about my dissertation, I am a modern languages student at Durham University, and in my previous year, in my third year, I did a year abroad in the Canary Islands in Spain. Before then, I studied Spanish and French for my first 2 years at Durham. I really enjoyed both of them, but at the end of my second year, I decided to drop French and just focus on Spanish. I really enjoyed Spanish a bit more. I think the Spanish department at Durham are a bit friendlier and a bit more creative and innovative than the French department. And I just felt more inspired and motivated. And also I really wanted to spend an entire year abroad in Spain rather than splitting the year into two. If you do two languages, you have to split the year abroad in two, whereas I did one, so I could spend an entire year in Spain, which was really fun, really useful, and just a great experience. The languages degree at Durham is very interdisciplinary, very cross-curricular. It deals with a lot of different things. It's not just about the actual language and the speaking and the grammar and things like that. It's also about literature and culture and cinema and politics, history, geography, even psychology and sociology. So many different things are woven into the degree, and I really like that because it's diverse and it's varied. You're always studying something different. It does make it quite hard sometimes because there's a lot of different skills to master within just one degree, but I do like the diversity that it offers. When I was deciding on a dissertation topic for my proposal, I was a bit unsure what to do because obviously within the Spanish speaking world there are so many different things going on and so many different aspects that I could potentially focus on. The list was basically endless, and one day I would say to myself, this is my topic. The next day I would wake up and think, I don't want to do that topic, I want to do something else. In the end I decided to focus on something that I enjoy and also something that plays to my academic strengths. So I'm going to be writing on Latin American literature, and in particular the works of Gabriel García Márquez. He's a Colombian writer who is most famous for 100 Years of Solitude. It's a really amazing book. It's kind of like the Bible of Latin America in many ways, and it's one of the most famous magical realist novels. Magical realism is the kind of thing I want to focus on in my dissertation. I want to write about what it's used for, and in particular the effectiveness of magical realism in communicating social and political issues within Latin America. This deals with everything from the colonization of the Americas to independence wars and violent civil wars and striking workers on banana plantations. It really covers so much ground within just one text. It manages to do this through the mode of magical realism, which I've been researching recently, obviously, as it's the kind of main focus of the dissertation. Magical realism is basically the presentation of magical or fantastical elements, basically things that are not proven scientifically, things that are not scientifically possible. They're presented within an otherwise ordinary real-world setting. Magical realism didn't actually originate in Latin America. It was sometimes used to describe post-expressionist artwork in Germany in the 1920s after World War I. But it kind of became forgotten there. It wasn't really a popular term until it was resurrected in Latin America from the late 1940s onwards, and through the 1950s, 60s and 70s there were a lot of writers using magical realism. Magical realism really appealed to Latin Americans because it was a kind of fusion of literary styles. It had magical elements which were kind of compatible with Latin American beliefs and traditions like mythology and different kind of folkloric traditions that they had. They could incorporate their own cultural realities within realism, which was already an established mode back in Europe. But obviously realism on its own didn't really speak to their own realities. It wasn't really compatible. It wasn't really adequate to talk about Latin America properly and to go into real social and historical and political issues. When I was reading 100 Years of Solitude, one of the things that really stood out to me was the setting of Macondo, which is actually a fictional town, but it's based on a real part of Colombia where Gabriel García Márquez was born. It's basically in the north of Colombia, near the Caribbean coast. It's a really fascinating town because it's based on reality and a lot of real things happen, but it's kind of infused with magical elements as well. So in the text I could really see the linking of space and magical realism. So in my dissertation I kind of want to focus on the links between magical realism and spatiality. Spatiality is kind of space, but more to do with the way a writer constructs space. It's more of a narrative theory or concept. Obviously where an event happens affects the way that it pans out. Different historical events happen differently in different countries or different cities because each place has their own specific conditions. I also want to look at the way that magical realism and spatiality are linked to power, because a lot of Latin American history is to do with uneven power relations, you know, the links between the colonizers and the colonized, the links between capitalist imperialists and their workers, and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to basically look at magical realism, spatiality and power in the works of Gabriel García Márquez. Obviously for the dissertation it's 12,000 words, so I need to pick quite a few different texts to look at as part of my analysis of magical realism, spatiality and power. So the first one is obviously 100 Years of Solitude. This is the kind of book that inspired my dissertation really, because I saw the space of Macondo and its magical realist elements, and I just thought this is such a intriguing text. I'm really fascinated by it and I can't wait to write about it. I really want to look at the uneven nature of Latin American society and the way that literature can say so much about the past, the way that literature is used to comment on historical trends and circumstances. I would also like to write on The Autumn of the Patriarch, which is a text from 1975 that deals with dictatorship. It uses magical realist elements within the space of the presidential palace. This is a palace that's sort of decaying and dying as the dictator in the novel is losing his power. It's probably even darker than 100 Years of Solitude. 100 Years of Solitude sometimes has moments of light relief, but this is dark, it's a kind of claustrophobic text. You are really sucked into the text and it's very vulgar and grotesque at times, but it says so much about dictatorship, which was a horrific occurrence in Latin America, and you know, Latin Americans are still living with the scars of this, so this is a very relevant text. Again, it uses magical realism, spatiality, and it comments on power, so I feel like that's a really important text to look at. I will probably do 3 analytical chapters in my dissertation in total. I can't fully decide on the last one at the moment, but I am considering looking at some of his short stories, which were actually, well, they were written throughout his career, but I want to look at the ones that were written before 100 Years of Solitude and The Autumn of the Patriarch. I feel like the short stories kind of show the roots of magical realism because they're short, they're experimental. It was a way for Gabriel García Márquez to experiment with magical realist elements before then incorporating them in his novels. So there are a few texts like Big Mama's Funeral, which deals with different abuses of power in Latin America. There's also a text called A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings, where this man kind of falls from the sky into someone's backyard and looks at exploitation and violence. To be honest, the short stories are a bit more allegorical. The meanings are not as clear because they just don't have the same level of historical context and development in them, so you have to be quite open in terms of the way you can interpret them. But a lot of the short stories have been interpreted in relation to Latin American history. Gabriel García Márquez was a very historicised writer. He was very aware of the world around him. He was aware of politics and he wanted to use literature to comment on the political situation in Latin America. So probably the short stories will be quite an interesting collection to write about. But I'm not completely sure yet. There are still other texts that I might consider, but they're the ones that I think are probably most likely to write about. So I'm probably going to write about 100 Years of Solitude, The Autumn of the Patriarch, and some of the short stories. This video is probably a bit rambly, it's probably a bit of a mess because I'm still sort of processing exactly what I want to write about, because I've never done a dissertation, so I don't really know what I'm doing in many ways, but I'm trying my best. I'm trying to research the topic that I've chosen, and I definitely think it's an interesting topic. It's one that I'm fascinated about. I always like learning about Latin America. Before coming to university, I actually didn't know much about Latin America at all, and now it's one of my favourite continents to read about in literature, so definitely think university has opened my mind to new avenues and new opportunities to learn about different things in the world. And I did a module in my second year as well on Latin American literature that I got a really high mark on. That was actually my best module in second year. So I think, continuing on with Latin American literature is definitely something that plays to my academic strengths as well as my interests. As I said at the beginning, please let me know if you've got any advice for writing a dissertation, or what do you think about my dissertation at the moment? I'm in the early stages, so don't criticise me too much if it's not perfect, but I'm going to work really hard over the next year to hopefully produce a really good dissertation. I think it's due at the end of April 2019, so I have a few months to do it. I know that time flies by at university, but I'm going to try my best to produce something that I can be proud of.